All right, so today we are going to be talking about the life of a professional counselor, and this presentation will be by Amber, Carly, Courtney, Emily, Carla, and myself, Lindsay. The professional that we chose to interview is named Danny Shearer, and he is a licensed marriage and family therapist as well as a certified addictions counselor. And the program that he went through had given him a theoretical approach, which is the systems theory, which is largely based on families. And the reason why he decided to go into therapy was because of his own personal struggles with addiction throughout his adolescence. And when he was in college, he was actually a theater major, and then he had realized that that wasn't healthy for him, and he had decided to switch into counseling. And from that point on, he had decided that that was the road that he wanted to go on. And from there, he has started working at Mountain Crest Behavioral Health, where he continues to work with people who struggle with different addictions.
Yeah, and Danny, he is a big advocate for self-care, having been an addict throughout his adolescence and his young adulthood. He learned as he recovered by going to AA meetings, and he had his own therapist that he still checks in with now and then, but he pretty much discovered ways to continue and stay accountable with his healing. His biggest practices for self-care is yoga and running. He's a triathlete. He does several marathons a year. He's a yoga instructor. He travels a lot with his wife and does a lot of gardening. He says that it's just important for anybody who's going through any sort of recovery to find something that they love, whether that's dancing, art. He said, just something to distract the mind. He did share that there are elements in the midbrain, specifically the amygdala, where it's, what does he say? The elements in the midbrain that still want people to see their addiction as a self-soothing resource. So trauma sits in the place in the brain that just experiences feelings, and it doesn't necessarily have a calendar. It just feels the sensation, and that's why trauma still comes back for a lot of people. And so he said he keeps the same mentality with recovery, just being aware of himself and keeping himself in check. We had asked him about how he is able to just leave his work without bringing it home with him. And he just says you have to learn to turn more work off when you get home. And part of taking care of yourself is reminding yourself that you did your job and you have to move on. He had a sponsor who was huge in telling him he needed to keep separation of the church and the state. And he's followed his lead on this, and his sponsor was very instrumental in helping him with that.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of professional counseling. To begin, social work, psychiatry, psychology, and counseling originated in the 19th century. Counseling particularly evolved from early vocational guidance activities. So the social work field at this time focused on the study of laboratory science and an attempt to understand the nature of the person. Today, psychiatry, psychology, and counseling, as well as social work, can be seen on slightly different but parallel paths, which can be seen in this image that we have off to the right. It kind of shows in 1850, they were all pretty spread out, and over time, they kind of merged closer together. So the social reform movements of the 1800s included working with the poor and destitute, psychiatrists trying to change treatments of the mentally ill, and educators who insisted on more humanistic teaching methods and access to public education. So the counseling profession soon formed from these specific reform movements. And a quote from our textbook, it says, if one decade in history had to be signaled out for the most profound impact on counselors, it would be the 1950s. So during this time, the counseling profession shifted from a humanistic, non-directive orientation And so this era saw a push to depathologize individuals. So the assertion of developmental theories in areas of career counseling, child development, and lifespan development began to happen here. So now a little bit on the development of professional counseling. So the first ACA ethical code was created in 1961 and has now been updated numerous times, reflecting concerns taking place in our present day. These ethical standards will always continue to be revised in order to reflect these new viewpoints. So there's been a strategic increase in practicum and internship hours in hope to have a higher caliber student going into their licensure. Laboratory science and research techniques have become very important to counselors in recent years and will continue to be moving forward. Counseling has moved from a moralistic, directive approach of vocational guidance to a more humanistic approach. And now evidence-based practices are more prevalent than ever before, which is extremely important for us to be aware of just heading into this field.
So I'm going to go over the educational requirements. In the state of Colorado, there is no certain undergraduate degree that you have to have. You do have to have a master's or doctoral degree. The program must be accredited by CACREP. They must include practicum, internship, and to pass the NCE. 2,000 hours of counseling within 2 years under the board supervision. You have to have 100 hours of supervision, and 70 of those have to be in person. You also must pass the Colorado jurisprudence exam. License is good for 4 years, but it expires on August 31st of the odd years, and you can reinstate your license or renew your license within 6 weeks of the expiration. We also wanted to figure out what it would take to be an addiction counselor. When you go in on the lowest level of it, high school diploma and coursework in addiction, 21 hours of addiction treatment, 21 hours of addiction counseling, 21 hours of group counseling and motivational interviewing. You have to have 14 hours in CBT, coexisting conditions, assessment and treatment, professional ethics, pharmacology 1 and 2, trauma-informed care, and you have to have 4,000 experience hours within 1 year. You have supervision twice a month, and the MAC test must be passed.
Here we go. What are ethics? Ethics, defined as the collectively agreed upon set of correct behaviors within the context of a professional group which aim to do no harm. And with the development of ethical codes and guidelines, counselors then consult and base their decisions upon a standard, as well as have a guide to direct themselves towards certain behaviors that reflect the underlying values of counseling, to create a framework for difficult ethical issues, and give a measure of defense should a situation lead to a malpractice lawsuit. In 1961, the American Counseling Association, or the ACA, developed its first code of ethics, which was predominantly counselor-focused. Through its revision in 2014 and moving toward a more client-focused approach, it was able to incorporate advances in technology to include distance counseling and social media. Heralded as an industry standard in the field of counseling by the 2011 landmark court case of Ward versus Wilbanks, the ACA Code of Ethics solidified the importance of establishing guidelines when handling the treatment of clients, regardless of counselor beliefs or values, and affirmed the timeline of when the relationship begins. Next slide, please. So utilizing ethical guidelines can help avoid violations and obstacles that can get in the way of effective client care. Through the development of ethical decision-making models such as problem-solving and moral models, the core principles and virtues such as autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, fidelity, and veracity can be incorporated into each session to maintain every effort in hopes of determining right from wrong. Extra concern is needed with counseling sessions regarding certain situations, for instance, when counseling minors. Special effort is needed when addressing competence, consent, confidentiality, and competing interests. The interviewer, Dan Shears, the counselor that we interviewed as a local counselor, sees challenges arise when counselors use suppositional questioning with children in order to produce better answers. Counselors need to be diligent, educated, and aware of how to properly execute ethical standards when working with these special cases. Next slide, please. Counselors have the duty and responsibility to themselves, their colleagues, and clients to adhere to the ethical guidelines and educate themselves regarding the laws in order to maintain the level of standards set forth by the governing authority developed by the ACA. Although there are issues that are not addressed and some counselors may have conflicting beliefs, ethical codes have been established to promote integrity and growth in order to achieve the best possible outcomes for all involved.
There are many professional organizations. We're just going to highlight a few today. The largest in the world is the ACA, or American Counseling Association. The primary benefits of the ACA are ethical consultation, professional liability insurance, which will be important to all of us, professional development opportunities, journal subscriptions, as well as networking and mentoring opportunities. Other good organizations to know about are the American Art Therapy Association, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapies, and the American Play Therapy Association. Many of these have similar primary benefits. It's always good to know what your licensure in your state requires, because some of them require you to join specific organizations. The annual dues of these organizations are anywhere from $95 a year to $210 a year.
The following couple slides are the interview questions that we took the time to collaborate upon, and that will conclude our presentation. Thank you so much for listening.